Do you ever hear?
There's a total disconnect now between the ruling group and the masses.
I hate psychology.
Clear out.
They're the same worm-like characters.
The analysts,
Fuck you with your stupid arguments.
they should not bother us.
Democracy. All of this just works.
Vote for the generations who are coming.
Fully dynamic game engine.
A millennial video essayist.
Always support strength
Constant cradle.
and identity.
I haven't yearned. They are a disease of our time.
Clear them out. You're voting for what your grandfather and father fought for.
I sit and yearn.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Longhouse, the weekly show for the sensible centrist. I'm very happy to be back after a week's vacation last week, and with me as always I have my co-host Luddick Path.
Oh, thank you. It's nice to be back again. 2 weeks go by pretty quickly. It was nice to get
They do,
a break
yeah.
week, but there's a lot of stuff happening in the world, so there's also
lot
been
of
a bit
stuff
of a
going on.
congestion of
Yeah.
in terms of content. So it's like we should just run 5 episodes in a row or something now, because just to cover everything that's been happening.
Yeah, so we might be doing sort of current events going back 4 weeks in a couple of weeks' time, but there's a lot of things to unpack, both locally and more globally, I suppose, that we want to cover. But first, this week, and I think we're just going to have to get into this because the amount of content, essentially, that you've presented me with, you've dug really deep, gone into deep data science almost, to bring out a presentation or just an overview on what you call, I guess, Russian narratives in the online space. And in a sense, looking at the stuff you've shown me over the past couple of weeks, I mean, I guess it wouldn't be wrong to say that in a sense this could be one of the more controversial episodes that we'll do.
Yeah, it's easily
Because I
being
have
one
a
of
feeling
the.
we'll challenge a lot of people's sort of expectations and narratives, really.
Yeah, it's easily one of the more controversial ones. So we have our security set in the comment section to fend off bots, as they will naturally show up. And I mean, of course, a lot of these topics is like kicking in a hornet's nest, right? Because it's touching on topics that are going on right now. People have very strong opinions on these things. But I mean, part of the motivation for doing this stream, and I mean, really, it's would have been more topical for me to do it maybe 2 weeks ago. But it's sort of, I mean, we have guests on and things are planned ahead of time, so you have to just take it as they come. So it's 2 things. It's sort of like the general Russia question and my views on Russia, to try to outline exactly what I think about it and why I'm talking so much about it. And the second part is to do a bit more of kind of a response video to Jay Burden, because Jay
Right.
Burden is doing a series currently on Palestine, right? Where he's done 2 guests, Academic Agent and Thomas 777. He's going to do Pete Quinones. I mean, yeah, Jay Burden is great. We love Jay Burden, and I recommend people watch. I mean, assuming you're here, you know who he is, so you don't need the recommendation. But I mean, in the AA stream and sort of connected to the Israel-Palestine situation that is developing, there is a kind of ideological split that is going on in the, I guess you could call it the dissident right or the broader right wing. And some of it is, let's just say, European and American split, and some of it is a kind of split in priorities in terms of where you think the focus should be. So some people are
Yeah.
putting it very much on, like they want probably sort of a very clean, crystallized anti-Zionist type focus, where other people are, I guess, more, you could say, more pluralistic in terms of what they think the problem is. So that's just kind of what the reason. I was brought up in the stream with Academic Agent, where they talked about third worldism and the general concept of third worldism, and AA did a sort of rebuke of the whole concept. The problem is that there's been so much linguistic confusion around the term.
Yeah, I think they missed what you were talking about in terms of third worldism, and it ended up as a rebuke of George Soros more than it was a rebuke of what you were talking about.
Yeah, just to explain a little bit of what was being said there, it's like he brought off my sort of critique as third worldism. So, I mean, in this stream, I have set up like an entire disclaimer list to sort of avoid cringe and unnecessary questions and complications, and like people feeling like I'm pointing the finger at them or trying to alienate people. So it's a very hard subject to broach. But I'm on the thread now of the Burden podcast. So I'm just going to explain sort of quickly what the idea was. And I mean, it's really coming to say issues like the American, Columbia campus protests. To what degree do you support leftists, for example, in the anti-Zionist cause, and to what degree do you want to expand the kind of alliance between, let's say, like Marxists, for example, who are anti-Zionists? You have or Arabs and Muslims. That wasn't so much the question. I mean, with Academic Agent, he rebutted it by going back to his octopus model, right? We both of us saw that presentation when it came out in 2022. It's on the Schilding's Twitter, I think now. They've published it on their YouTube channel. See some of the speeches. A lot of good stuff. Quickly explain the Academic Agent octopus model is a sort of, what do you call, like a kind of dialectic response to Goldberg's cathedral model, where it's incorporation of complex systems with the cathedral and trying to map out the so-called castles of the regime. And then looking at basically the question, okay, who are the elites in the West? And what castles and what kind of levers of powers do they have? So the thesis that was put forward is that you have roughly three groups of elites in the West. That is the neocons, that's more of the American military elites, the techno-globalists that, there's of course some contention about who's included in what groups, but you have it there, perfect.
Yeah, this is the model, the octopus. I couldn't find any other version of it that quickly. So the neocons, the techno-globalists, which is, I guess you would see that is like the WEF people, the more of the European, Tony Blair oriented, the people who go on about climate change, digitization, digital IDs, that's kind of the big thing. And the third group that he dubbed the third worldist, and this is where the confusion comes in, right? Because when he's talking about the third worldist elite group in the West, he would be talking about what we typically consider like the far left, as in, say, like the Open Society Foundation, for example, or like say a person who runs an art gallery, for example, or artists like I don't know, like Bono, or these types who have some sort of like fetish for lifting up the or giving like drugs to drug addicts, stuff like that. Yeah, South
Africa, or these or Palestine, or these types of things. Like with the example of Open Society and why it's relevant is because, let's say that they're providing legal services to refugees, for example. That's something that's happening now as well with the people are trying to implement the Rwanda plan in Britain, but it's being stifled by human rights lawyers who are trying to destroy the Rwanda regime and the outsourcing of refugees, because it's sort of not against the Human Rights Charter. And it's like this coalition of people, but that you'd consider on the left, that are very dedicated to giving human rights and sort of improving the lives, especially of people in the third world. And therefore they're called the third worldists, as being kind of, the Western elites who are sort of fetishizing the groups that are in what you'd consider the third world. I mean, for clarification, the concept of the third world itself is a very confusing term, because it's Cold War ideology, right? Where you had the American sphere, that is the first world, the English-speaking world. the second world, that is the communist sphere, the USSR, and the third world, that is sort of neither affiliated with
Mhm.
the first or the second world, that is sort of like the African countries or South America.
Yeah, and it's sort of
yeah.
slightly shifted after the Cold War into just, trying to categorize the wealth of various nations. And when we were growing up, I suspect the world developing nation was used a lot, right?
Yeah, we use in Norway like the term I country, like I nation and U nation. There's a U it's like a D for developing nation or I for industrialized nation.
Yeah, I think it's underdeveloped nation or something like that. That's the technical term.
Yeah, something
Yeah.
something to that effect. And so the term third world has sort of been interchanged then with being countries that are not up to a certain, let's say they're not up to a wealth standard of the let's say like the Anglo countries or the non-speaking modern European countries, and they don't have the same kind of demographic, sort of democratic institutions or democratic structures. That's usually sort of the benchmark, and the third worldists are then trying to both give more wealth and bring those countries up to the developing nation standards.
Usually
And
at the cost of the developed nations.
of course, I mean, it reminds me of the Louis C.K., for example, who was on, I don't know if people saw that clip where he was on Joe Rogan and he was talking about, the third world and sort of, well, things should be worse in the United States. Like it's not fair that we're having it so good here when people in Honduras, for example, are doing terrible. So we should just allow everybody to pour in.
I feel like every other stream I mention the guy, Drunkpa Cunley or whatever his name is on Twitter, the, PR person for the Republic of Chad or wherever his bio is. He has a great series of tweets about, what's his name? The chef, the no reservations guy, Anthony Bourdain.
Oh, yeah.
Where he's like quoting over him going to third world nations, like eating like the most sloppiest slop you can think of. Like, here's our, a bug stew, right? And he's like, this is great. You couldn't get this in the US. I hate white people.
Yeah. But that's exactly the type of person that this is. However, when I'm talking about third worldists, I'm talking about really kind of it not these groups, but it's sort of not a third but a fourth group that is really not what you consider a Western elite, but really more of a representation of foreign elites in the West. People who are in the West to represent Russia, for example, China. I guess Russia and China would be the most relevant ones. Those people would, of course, make nods to the entire BRICS coalition, but everything that's not Russia and China is kind of irrelevant. India is not really that, Indians suck, but they're not really that relevant in terms of aggression towards the Western world. No. Brazil is not that relevant in terms of aggression towards the Western world, and South Africa is like kind of who gives a shit. BRICS is just sort of adding on more and more of these kind of shithole countries that don't really add any strategic value to that coalition anyway. So it's really two countries that are you consider sort of threats from a Western perspective. It's Russia for the sort of the in terms of military direct aggression, sabotage, intelligence, and there's China that is sort of an economic, slower, more kind of long-term threat. I don't think that would be controversial. So when you have people in the Western world who are sort of in media, in institutions, who are then advocating for either integration or sort of supremacy of these groups, then that's what I would call a sort of third worldist. My example would say be someone like Jackson Hinkle, who has been, moving around a lot in various circles. He's quite media savvy. If you have YouTube, you've probably seen him. He's been on Tucker Carlson, Piers Morgan, George Galloway. I don't know who hasn't brought him in, but he is the sort of person who is kind of advocating for the cause of MAGA communism, which, I mean, in my opinion, is just kind of this sort of subversive angle from the Russians to try to just use the MAGA brand to shoehorn as many Russian priors and as many Russian narratives into the picture as possible.
You're going to have to. Can you dig into that a bit? Like, what narratives are they trying to push into MAGA? Do you have any examples?
let's say what narratives that they're pushing. Anti-colonialism would have been one. That's sort of the thing. More, let's say, like the general kind of Russian priors, I guess, would have been attached to. I need to just get the spreadsheet out here. What I think is sort of the most
Sure, no
relevant
problem.
to answer the question or not. Okay, let's say like the narratives around Russia, for example, that I think the Russia is trying to prop up, which would be something like the idea that Russia is sort of traditionalist religious power, in a sense, emerging in the West against the
Okay.
West is basically decadent and degenerate. Russia is trad and based, for example. That would have been
Right.
one narrative, or that
Which,
Russia
you know,
is,
if you remember our episode on Russian multiculturalism a couple of months ago, I mean, Russia seems to have a lot of the same issues that something like the US does, of course, a bit different, and coming from a different sort of, I guess, different nodes of power. I mean, I think it would be fair to say that the US has a lot more Zog, as it were, problems than Russia seems to have. Although when it comes to multiculturalism and immigration, etc., a lot of
that's also something that I want to
reproducing, right?
get into is really kind of the Jewish influence in Russia, which is also sort of a narrative that's being pushed here. Like, we're getting right into the meat.
Okay,
it wasn't sort of in my presentation, but we're
we
having
can
a
come back to it
conversation
later.
here, right?
It's fine.
But
I
that
think
would be,
for anyone who's listening, the point of the stream, just, you know, to help you all understand what Ludwig is trying to do here. I think the point of the stream is to just raise some awareness and help you have some awareness about what you're reading when you're scrolling online and why you're reading it. In the same way that we've become sort of hyper aware of sort of narratives coming out of the GAE and how that's targeting us, I think we should be robust and aware of the narratives coming out of the other side. Because I think, I mean, at least for Ludwig and I, we've said many times that we don't appreciate either. And so this is an analysis where we're not saying that it's going to be either you're pro-Russian or you're pro-gay. It's just that both of these things can be narratives that are sort of being presented to you at the same time. It's an and, not an or, I think I tweeted.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, the point here is subversion, right? And people have sort of gotten the idea into that all subversion is basically Zionist subversion. And I think a lot of people are misinterpreting signals that they think are Zionist narratives that they're taking in their media, that in my opinion are actually Russian narratives that are being pushed on them. And I think especially right-wing circles are very vulnerable to this. You know, I'm getting more into it later, but it's really sort of the mainstream conservative sphere, especially in the United States and mostly around Europe in the Anglo countries, that the Zionists have a stranglehold on the conservative sphere. That is basically everything you get that is sort of mainstream, what you call that kosher conservatives stuff, is really just as a kind of vassal for Zionist narratives that needs to just kind of justify themselves. But when you're moving outside of that and you're getting into our space, the amount of stuff that's going on here that is just kind of like thinly veiled Russian
you want
propaganda.
to show the it's not a Venn diagram, it's that circle diagram.
I'm just gonna do the disclaimers first, and then we can get into the Venn.
Let's do the
Venn
disclaimers.
diagrams. I didn't need to just do the disclaimers to avoid kicking too many orders at once. So the first is that my opinions are my own, and they do not reflect the views of my employer and any organizations that I'm a part of. The next thing is like, hey, what am I talking about? When I'm talking about the word propaganda and narratives, I mean, like, basically a sort of story that's being told and a connection between pieces of information that's meant to influence people. And if it sort of doesn't matter in a sense if it's 100% false, if it's partly true, mostly true. The whole point is just to disseminate a kind of narrative or a story that's meant to make you. The point of especially Russian propaganda, I divide it into 4 sections that sort of reinforce each other. It's sort of discrediting of Western or U.S. domestic policy, discrediting of Western foreign policy, legitimizing Russian foreign policy, and then legitimizing Russian domestic policy. So you can imagine how these things reinforce each other, right? Let's say if you're able to influence somebody to believe that everyone in Russia is Christian, for example, and they're fighting the war in Ukraine it's a fight between Orthodox Christians and like Zionist Jew satanic converts, then you've sort of legitimized Russia's foreign policy because you believe that everyone in Russia is Christian, for example. They're all white and Christian, and everybody in Ukraine
that's a
is
very
Jewish.
extremist position, though. But
it's
I mean, I have
not
seen
really
tweets about
considering-
Zelensky being a transvestite or something like that. So
Yeah, I mean, I made the tweet that people think that Obama was like the Islamo-communist, but Zelensky is like the Scio-fascist, Satano-homo, liberal, cocainist or whatever. Like, I think this sort of like the narratives that are running is just pretty much everything that they can throw at it, and this is a part of the.
I mean, it
I
does
guess
make sense that sort of the strategy for a country that cannot control the narrative, right? Because we can pretty easily say that the US or the GAE, as it were, is very good at controlling the narrative that the people in the West see, and sort of any Russian opposition to that wouldn't be able to fight on even ground. So what you do is you essentially just try to destabilize the narrative that the West is telling any way you can.
I would compare basically the Russian propaganda strategy to the Russian war strategy. It's really just throwing everything you have at the problem. Quoting Stalin here, somebody said like, quality is better than quantity. And then Stalin replied,
and now that they have all the
quantity,
Indians in the data centers, they can keep posting even more. The BRICS is growing too strong online.
Quantity is a quality all on its own. That is really
enough.
like the tagline, I guess, for the Russian propaganda strategy. It's really just throwing as much spaghetti on the wall as you possibly can, throwing every single narrative that you can and hoping something sticks, and then just continuing to push the bayonet in wherever that is. And so what you, of course, run into then is the sort of the Sigmund Freud's teapot problem, or the sort of teapot logic that they have. You could say that, okay, like there's no Russian disinfo, but they're running concurrent narratives that are contradicting each other at the same time. So it's sort of, if you're actually paying attention, you sort of notice how incoherent a lot of it is. But okay, let's see. I don't know. Did you? I'm just going to continue. Did you get the link for? If you go to the top of the bar there, this is like the unfriendly countries list.
Yes, I have it.
For Russia, you could bring up that paper.
Meanwhile, I'll read this €2 donation from Peregrinus de Flandria. Thank you so much. He says, Alexa, play L'amour toujours, which is the song that I believe a lot of Germans are singing a certain phrase to, which is not kosher, as it were. So you wanted the unfriendly countries list, is that it?
Unfriendly countries list, yes.
Yes, here it comes.
This is also an important disclaimer to make. I'm just going to have a sip of water. Okay, very good. So Russia, since 2018, they publish a list of countries that are unfriendly to Russia, whether it be sanctions or something else, that they're a part of an organization that is sanctioning them. And I think this is a good indicator for when I'm talking about Russian propaganda, who is it targeted at? Then it's going to be these countries, particularly the United States. Secondarily would be the European Union countries. There are countries here like Albania or something. I mean, the messaging that's being sent out there, it's probably less relevant. The reason I need to preface this is that it's easy to think that it's like I'm talking about propaganda that's being used inside of Russia, which I believe is something completely different from what they're sending to the outside. About only 5% of Russians speak English, right? So when you're reading this kind of English pro-Russian stuff on Twitter, Facebook, or social media, YouTube, whatever, you have to realize that there's like very few of the actual Russians that can read this or participate in it. And Twitter and a lot of other social media is restricted inside Russia. I mean, I don't know to what degree. I was trying to get the VPN where I could get the server inside of Russia, but it was actually difficult. I wanted to just see, okay, if I was there, what exactly did they get to see or not? So that's not entirely clear what the internal messaging is. It would be interesting if we had some maybe some friend of the show could maybe come on and sit and talk about that if they knew a little bit more. But what I'm interested in is sort of what is the stuff that is going out, because it sounds very trivial, but it's easy to miss. And I think it's a lot of it is supposed to have this feeling that you're just kind of stumbling over it. This is like you just found this narrative on Twitter or on somebody else, and you're sort of, oh, well, this is like that. This is what the Russians are talking about. This is really based or something, but it's very much targeted at you.
Or you're sort of, you get turned away by the GAE propaganda through, our spheres and our understandings, right? Where you have the sort of awakening moment of, wait, hang on a minute, maybe, USA bad, right? I'm oversimplifying, but just because, one narrative is incorrect doesn't mean that every other narrative is correct, right? But it's a very easy sort of like human psychological thing to do, is to say that, the other narrative must be right because the first one is definitely wrong, right?
Well, yeah, to me, this has become like a Zen point where they talk about in Zen Buddhism that nobody is enlightened, right? The people just trying to reach enlightenment. We're supposed to meditate
right,
an hour a day or something, and after 20 years you reach enlightenment.
And trying to crawl out of that sort of Dunning-Kruger effect of thinking that, hang on a minute, anything that comes out of Russia is better than anything that comes out of the GAE is difficult, but I think it's the way forward.
Well, yeah, okay, we're getting further into it, but my point is that really nobody is red pilled, right? That's the thing. It's sort of you're always kind of subject to some sort of narrative, and I realized that a lot of people who sort of thought they were red pilled, they sort of plugged their head from one propaganda machine to another propaganda machine, and it just sort of goes like that. So it's very difficult to have any integrity. Usually, you just end up.
Someone is asking what the Bahamas did to anger Russia. I would like to know as well, but
that's going to have to be another stream. But it's very interesting. Of course, this list will come up later as well, because I need to rebut certain narratives about certain covert wars that are allegedly going on. So. But okay, that's the point. I made the point about the trueness of it, that it's how true it is not necessarily relevant for whether it's propaganda or not. Let's say, for instance, that if I'm walking door to door somewhere and talking about the USS Liberty incident, I could, of course, be serving like 100% facts on it, but it would still be classified as like, this is a sort of propaganda initiative that I'm doing to influence people's opinions on Israel.
Sure.
I don't think that would be controversial. And this is a bit of the same thing, that it's the truth value of some of these claims are less relevant than the influence that they're supposed to have. But some of the things that I'm going to cover here is going to be just straight up disinfo, because it's easier to make the point. If I would just go to stuff that I'd like to say that this is Russian propaganda, and it's like stuff that seems very credible coming from very credible people, it's a lot harder, I think, to just make the point that I'm trying to make, at least to a skeptical audience. So we're going to have to just go for the low-hanging fruits. And boy, there's a lot of that. So okay, just to pre-answer some questions here. Okay, is everybody who spreads propaganda a paid shill? And I honestly don't believe that. I think that most of the people who are believing these talking points, who are sort of spreading these talking points, are absolutely genuine and kind of believe exactly this for various reasons. Sometimes it's misinformation, other times it's because of some calculation they have, or that they genuinely believe that this is kind of the right tactical thing. So I'm not going to just sort of dismiss at least most people and just say that because that's a sort of tendency either to say you're a Fed or you're a shill, right? So assuming that they have some kind of check, some regular sum of rubles that's just being set on their account every month, and they have to go make these points. So I'm not going to make that claim.
Unless you're Ian's Miles Chung, apparently. That's something I wasn't aware of.
Yeah. Okay, next point is like, is it bad to have the same opinions that are being spread in these narratives? And I tried to make this point before, that you can have a coherent worldview that will overlap with these kind of Russian talking points, which is completely possible. You can also have a coherent worldview that overlaps with some liberal talking points or Zionist talking points or whatever. So I won't say that somebody who just agrees with some of these things automatically makes you a shill. it's really more in the case of people who agree with every single point that where you sort of are able to sniff out who is actually a bit more malicious. So yeah, we've gone over that. So I'm just going to look at the list here of things that I look for, like when I'm talking about who is actually doing this. What are some things that you want to look for in the people who are spreading the Russian narratives? The first one is like very easy. If they're explicitly stating that they have like a hard pro-Russian stance, then you can sort of expect them to also be spreading Russian narratives. Like an example would be, let's say, like Nick Griffin, or a lot of the British National Party people are like this. I mean, if you look at his Twitter, he's very just sort of openly pro-Russian. In a sense, he's wearing, you'll see him in pictures wearing this T-shirt with like the double-headed eagle, and he's very sort of openly in support of them, both in the Ukraine situation. I think he was even before that the invasion happened. So, openly stated it on Twitter. He's been to these conferences where he's made the case that he thinks Russia is going to save the West. So if people come out and say this, then it shouldn't be controversial if I point out that these people are pro-Russian or actually sort of working for like a foreign hostile government. The same is like you look at we've talked about the Norwegian far-right parties, like Alternative for Norway, that's what they're called internationally, or the Alliance in Norway, like with Hans-Jørgen Lysglimt Johansen. I watch his videos from time to time, and he's just explicitly stated that he thinks that Russia and China are going to be the leaders of the free world. They're going to be the moral leaders of the new world, right? And if people get drafted into the Norwegian army to fight in Ukraine, then they should deliberately sabotage equipment. I mean, if you're making statements like this, then I get to say that these people are pro-Russian and then working for a hostile government, right? I don't think that's controversial.
Yeah, whether or not they're actually on payroll, right?
Yeah, it doesn't matter if they're if they're on a payroll or not. If they, that I have sort of like different categories from what kind of people they are, but there are people who are just open kind of ideological allies with the Russian project or the Eurasian project for various reasons. I think in the terms of like right wingers and white nationalists in particular, it's very misguided, and it's sort of based on misinformation that we will get into later. But people like him have stated it officially, and that's what you're seeing with some of these like very far right parties. You're also seeing it on the far left, which I won't cover as much here. But it's in Norway, like you have the old Norwegian Communist Party. They're also very openly sympathetic to Russia.
Yeah,
and they run.
Well, I mean, they have been for years and years.
They've always been, so it's very consistent. I actually think that the far left has more integrity in these situations, because they will just openly admit to that we are communists, so we are Stalinists or something, and we've been supporting Russia as sort of like anti-imperialist. They've done it the whhole time. They did it during the Cold War. The ones that are really old did it, even before that. So they've been straight up with it, unlike a lot of right-wing people who sort of mask themselves as nationalists. But if you scratch a little bit on the surface, it's basically just all pro-Russia positions all the way down, usually at the cost of even internal sovereignty or actual, in my opinion, kind of nationalist interests. I mean, looking at also, let's say, a party in Norway that's less extreme, like the Norway Democrats, they do not have an explicit pro-Russia position, but they have like their foreign policy is basically supporting Israel for being a Western country and being anti-Muslim, and then wanting peace deals. Basically, they're constantly trying to broker for peace deals in the Ukraine, which is sort of becomes this kind of, in my view, an implicit pro-Russian position. And it is also something that I see, like a lot of these Russian accounts that I follow advocate for constantly. They're trying to push for peace deals and concessions in the Ukraine. So a lot of these.
What's the thing? They want us to stop. They want the West to stop sending. Again, this is just the analysis. It's not really value I'm putting in here, but they want us to stop sending weapons to Ukraine to enable a peace treaty with the Russians. Which strategically seems very backwards. I mean, you don't remove your strength and then say, now let's do a peace deal. Right.
Well, it does come from a point of Russian priors where you have to take everything Putin says 100% sincerely, and then things that are being said in the West is insincere. And
We
that's kind of
retreated
the
all of our strengths. Now let's do a peace deal, right?
well, yeah, that's the sort of the typical line that they'll take. Another sip of water. It'll be a lot of talking, so I'm glad I had a bottle. It's really hot here too. I don't know where it's like where you live.
It's been hot. It's been a bit colder the last couple of days, but
Yeah.
it's quite warm here, so
But
it's
yeah,
it's
okay.
understandable. Captain K asks, why does the West support Ukraine? Well, that's a good question. I mean, that depends on who you ask, but again, I feel that maybe you're asking that question to challenge us, and I'm going to remind you again to
Well,
say that both of these things can be true at the same time, right? Just
well,
because that we're pointing
yeah.
this out doesn't mean that we're saying that we're pro Ukraine in that sense, right?
Well, I mean, there's like 1,000 narratives to the Ukrainian story, but there's like legitimate geopolitical reasons to want to support Ukraine. Whether it's like the people in Europe who genuinely see Russia as an expansionist threat,
Yeah, someone
or
like
say
Macron
like
or
the U.S., where I mean, Ukraine has had a status as a NATO ally. They did actually contribute troops to Afghanistan. I didn't know this, but they have sort of helped and been a part of a Western partnership. You have, you say, like people in the EU, for example, who believe that they are fighting for the Ukraine. You know, basically, they wanted to have Ukraine as a part of the EU, whereas they see that Putin is just sort of trying to pull
you're
Ukraine
like an
into,
actual Nazi living in Finland, and you believe that what the Ukrainian Nazis are doing is cool, so you're fighting for them. Or if you're someone in the upper echelons of the USG, it's because it's a hub of money laundering and trafficking, right? So,
Well, yeah, I don't subscribe to this narrative at all. It's like this extremely America-centric Hunter Biden's cock narrative that that is sort of like, I feel like
well,
it's
my
very
point
surface. It's
is,
like the people who
my
say
point
that
is, there's all sorts of narratives, right?
Ukraine is happening because of BlackRock or something. It's like because the BlackRock committed and JP Morgan committed a certain amount of money to rebuild Ukraine if the West wins. Then people have sort of concluded that the war is happening because BlackRock wanted to invest in the land or something, which is it's of course completely contingent on first the West winning and there being anything left to invest in. It's like a completely retarded talking points, but you see guys like, say, Tim Dillon, for example, that stand-up comedian who's in the Joe Rogan circuit, perpetuating that. I've seen like something like Patrick Bet David or these. It's like this super America-centric view of what's going on there, that it's like some kind of American investing firm that just wanted some money out of this. And so the interests of the people in Ukraine are completely ignored. The interests of like the European countries around Ukraine are completely ignored. It's only about like the cock of the vice president or something. That's kind of the. But again, I've lashed out against sort of America-centric views too many times. So I'm going to just keep going through the list of people I think that sort of clues that I use to figure out if I think somebody is a Russian shill or not. So point number 2 is if they make appearance on Russia Today, right, or Russian state media. I mean, for those of you who don't know Russia Today, you could look at the website. It is sort of that is the Russian state media. It is a website. They have a TV channel, and the stuff that's put on there is put on there to legitimize Russia. It is fully, it's not just a privately owned station that exists to make money. It is there to ensure Russian geostrategic interests, even no matter how trivial the stuff that appears on there is, but it's sort of pre-selected to in some way try to further Russian narratives. So if people have a history of collaborating with Russian state media, that's sort of an indicator, at least, that they are perpetuating Russian narratives. I mean, an example of this would be, say, like George Galloway, for example, who has written for Russia Today many times. I mean, he's also explicitly pro. He's also very explicitly pro-Russia. So we have some super chats. Yeah, this is actually glow in the dark. It's a very clean analysis, actually, from a neutral point of view. You have two spheres of interest to believe that they should have Ukraine inside of their circle, and that's it's actually sort of if you would explain it to an alien, this is actually the best explanation in my view.
So
you
Glow in
can
the Dark for $5,
Yeah.
just for anyone listening, says the EU and GAE want Ukraine in their circle. Russia wants Ukraine in their circle. Simple as. This is similar to what has happened for decades.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is generally, yeah. This is sort of two different spheres of interest that have different strategies for how to incorporate countries into their spheres. Whereas Russia is sort of more like this kind of old school type imperialist power, using sort of standard land imperialists, what we consider geopolitical elephant strategies. Whereas the global American sphere is more what you consider like the sort of neo-imperial money, what do you call money power, financial and cultural imperialistic sphere that both want Ukraine and believe that they have some. They think that Ukraine should be in their spheres. And there's of course the people in Ukraine themselves. So, but yeah, I don't think the Russia Today stuff is controversial. Let's say people who have access to stuff inside of Russia, let's say if they don't have Russian citizenship or something, if you get invited to events like something like the World Youth Festival, that's more of like a leftist thing. But they have Russia have their own versions of like the WEF Young Global Leaders and these types of things,
right?
Where it's something that you can go to. I mean, this is something that Burkhard gave me. Actually, it's pretty interesting. I'll link it to you in the private chat, and you can show the audience.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's see here. So this is the Fest 2024 link. Is that it?
Yep.
Let me bring that up. Here I have photos from the World Youth Festival 2024. Here's Vladimir Putin meeting with the World Youth Festival participants. He's taking a tour of the airport exhibition space. It's a thank you show. We believe in Russia mystery. It was a very heavily Russian, though. This is actually Russia?
Yeah, this is going
organized?
on inside of Russia. This is their version of the West Young Global Leaders, right? Where they're bringing, but it's much more focused on leftist stuff. This was like the previous like World Communist Forum or something, where they would bring in people from like the far left parties to this stuff, and so I mean there are no accidents with this stuff. If you see like these kind of far left parties who've been sympathetic to Russia or something, it's partly because they're being invited or sort of courted into these
right
into these events like this. I just wanted to put it in there as a sort of an example of what this is. I know that say our friend like Jackson Hinkle has been to not to this event, but he has been invited to speak at various conferences inside of Russia. So that would be kind of one. It's a sort of type of thing that you look for. If someone is kind of a pro-Russian agent or they have an affiliation there, this is a point to check off. Another thing would be affiliation, endorsement, or engagement. So some of the things is I don't want to say use guilt by association, but these things are based on networks. And if you're seeing the same people clustered together all the time, you sort of realize that there's something going on there. I mean, like say Jackson Hinkle's account, for example, is sort of tagged by some of these Russian embassy accounts on Twitter multiple times. He's been endorsed by other guys, like Galloway endorsed him. You have like the Judge Napolitano crowd. Scott Ritter has endorsed him. And so you're noticing that these people are sort of endorsing each other. They're going to the same podcasts, and so this is another thing that I look for. That they're always kind of clustered into the same media and interview circles. Next point is if they're married or in a relationship with a Russian citizen. Usually it's a woman, right? It's going to be some kind of male influencer who has some Svetlana or Natasha that is going to be pulling more in the direction of the Russian subversion.
Are you talking about like an actual honeypot operation?
Yeah, that's like a real honeypot. But I mean, Hinkle was busted for having for dating a Russian escort, like a high-level escort, right? So it's just pretty obvious what's going on there. It's a typical kind of. I mean, Russians have this tactic that they call compromat, right? The compromise. With they try to get you sort of sex tapes or something that they could use to pressure you. for this. I mean, other people, like say Richard Spencer was married to a Russian woman, right? And he sort of changed his views after he divorced. I mean, many people have pointed this out, but I mean, it has to be something to it, right? Henrik Palmgren, who runs Red Eyes TV, right? He's married to a Russian woman, and I think he even says that in the description. It's not a secret at all, but it's clearly something to note. Note there, especially like if you're seeing that okay, he's married to a Russian, and suddenly they start promoting Alexander Dugin or something on their show. That's like well, I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. So the next point is that if they're spending a disproportionate amount of time just promoting straight pro-Russian content or anti-American content, and you can't tell where their income is coming from. It's sort of a typical thing. You ask them, do they have a job? Or are they spending all day basically tweeting about these bricks or something?
Which is something or showing you, what's the word? What's safe for YouTube? Diverse people beating on non-diverse people.
Yeah, we're getting to that. Getting to that one. So, but it shouldn't be a surprise because you're seeing a lot of these Twitter accounts that are posting pro-Russia stuff like it's their day job, right? And they'll have some link. And these are not like big accounts, but say accounts with 5,000 to 20,000 views, and they have some kind of buy me a coffee Patreon or something where it's like easy if you want to throw them a few rubles for their efforts. You could do that if you work for Russian intelligence and you have a budget. I think it's pretty good return on your money.
So these people might be doing the work without really ever knowing that they're being paid by Russian interests. Is that what you're?
Yeah, I think so too. It's a very easy angle because we live in like a digitized world, a very sort of open digitized world where it's easy to send money. You have Bitcoin, PayPal, a lot of these solutions where you can't trace the money that well. So it's very easy from a Russian intelligence perspective to just set up a budget and try to find influencers that you think are making good content, right? And if they're making, stuff that is in line with the Russian agenda, you're just sending them money, right? They made a video that is sort of like, okay, here's Putin's Tucker Carlson interview, here's my commentary, and you do Putin worship, right? You sort of try to boost Putin or something. You send them $50 or something, and just nice content, just makes a little bit more of that. And if they're making something that's a little bit critical, you could give them negative feedback, right? Because they also have troll farms and these type of other, I think every country that's worth its salt has some kind of bot farm at this point. And Russia is no exception. They have pretty good budget for this stuff. So if they want to boost content that is pro-Russian, it's very easy for them to do so. Or if they want to punish content that is anti, you can also just mass downvote or leave mass angry comments, for example, just to give corrective feedback and use the carrot and the stick to sort of boost the influencers that have the right opinions and then try to bury the ones that aren't that good. Next point, Eastern Orthodox converts, which is now I'm getting into like hornet nest kicking, because there's so many people in the DR that are like this. This is the Eastern Orthodoxy is the official religion in Russia, right? And the Russian sort of patriarch, that's the Pope of their church, is very active in pushing propaganda pro Russia in this war. It's not a neutral institution at all. They're very much about pushing this good versus evil narrative that is sort of the holy Russia and blessing the weapons.
Yeah, because in Russia, the Orthodox Church is an active sort of political entity, right?
Well, yeah, the Patriarch Kirill is a KGB agent. This is an open secret, actually, but he is in Putin's inner circle. So there's no separation of church and state. The anti-liberals got their based church there, but you have to realize that there's no independence there from the Russian sort of elite narratives that are coming out and what's coming out of the church. And I think a lot of the people, especially in the American sphere, who are converting to Eastern Orthodoxy are doing it because they're hungry for that kind of like they're biting on a lot of the narratives, say like the sort of the macho, masculine trad Russia narrative against the gay West narrative, and that's the reason. It's very sort of, I think for many people, a kind of political conversion rather than a sincere conversion. I don't think it's suspicious, say, if you're an Eastern Orthodox who's living in Greece, for example, because these different countries have different jurisdictions for their churches that are they interact with each other, and the Russian church can influence them, but they're still having independent views on things. So you find Eastern Orthodox jurisdictions that support Ukraine, for example, or say some people who have just been Eastern Orthodox for generations. There's nothing suspect about that. It's completely normal. But when I'm seeing like these sort of mass amounts of people in the dissident right who sort of suddenly have either been Protestant or something, and they're suddenly converting into Eastern Orthodoxy, and they're starting to repeat these sort of like talking points that are coming out of the Russian church, that's when it starts to get a little suspicious, right? And they can do this in more overt or covert ways. I think like Jay Dyer would be one of the more interesting examples of this, where he's not going as much with these sort of overt kind of pro-Russia narratives. It's really more about making the West look bad by creating narratives around occultism and really trying to paint the West as like the stuff that's going on in the West is sort of evil and occult. And spending a disproportionate amount of time doing that, but he's sort of initiated in the same circles. You can find Jay Dyer going on podcasts, like say like pro-Russian podcasts, like the Duran, for example, where he's talking about more sort of conspiracy theories and let's say the Anglo-American Empire, these types of talking points. So that's one clue to point to these Russian narratives. Let's say anybody who's sort of using the if they're calling themselves sort of like anti-imperialists, for example, anti-colonialists, they're running like a very hard nationalist line. It's, things like America first, Norway first, alternative, neutral analysis. These are the types of things. And of course, now I keep kicking the hornet's nest there, but I'm just seeing this as a recurring pattern for a lot of these accounts that I'm looking at. That especially like when I was being interacting with the Norwegian far right sphere, there's just so many of these like bot accounts that just have like Norway first or something on them, and it's like Norway first, anti-fascist, and it's just all like pro Russia, pro Palestine propaganda, just wall to wall bot content. It's very, very typical stuff. So I'm not saying that you're wrong for having nationalist views or something. I'm just saying that it's a very sort of sneaky cover that these people are using to kind of like just shield themselves from just standing out and just saying openly that I'm actually just kind of a Russian. I'm just a Eurasianist or something. I support the multipolar world order. But they'll say that I'm a nationalist or something, or I'm a Sweden first or Norway first or something like that, when in reality their views are just it's just all in line with the Russian foreign policy. Let's see here. Tactical free speech absolutism is another thing that you're seeing with a lot of these pro-Russian types, where they keep whining about free speech. They say someone like Tucker Carlson or well, generally all of them pretty much. They keep playing the free speech card constantly, where they want as much free speech, as little restrictions in the West as possible, so that they can push their narratives. But they're not interested in extending free speech in Russia, for example. I mean, say like the platform Rumble is banned in Russia, right? Rumble is like the real free speech absolutist platform. That's where Nick Fuentes has his content, right? Because it's banned from everywhere else, but Russia doesn't allow it. So they're not really interested in it anywhere else. It just has to be in the West, so that they can do the maximum amount of harm with their narratives. So let's see some more points here. If they're using like sort of they have nationalism, but strong kind of anti-Nazi, anti-fascist rhetoric. This is something that is very integral to the Russian identity, is that nationalism but not Nazism or not fascism. They're not comfortable with the racial aspect of nationalism. So they're seeing this. This is just returns constantly. This kind of we hate Nazis. We want to denazify the opponent and so on. So this is something to really be aware of. Like the people who are performatively complaining about Azov battalion, for example, like the British government were sort of hosting Azov. It's like they're clutching their pearls at these ultra nationalist militias that are coming in and showing their flags. But okay, what's their problem with that? Is it because they're anti-liberal? Well, they are also anti-liberal, so they don't have a problem with that. It's because they're militaristic? No. Okay. So what exactly is their problem with these groups? It's that they're racist, essentially. And multiculturalism is actually pretty important in Russia, right? Okay, they don't tell you that, but that's really a part of their narrative. So the people who are hitting strongly on that, when I'm seeing that, and that's what they're leading with, is kind of like, oh, they're clutching their pearls at Nazi groups or whatever, and but they're running defense for Russia on everything else. It's because they're just straight up pro-Russian. There's no other reason for this other than from like this Russian heritage history perspective. Let's see. Whataboutism is a sort of thing that is pretty standard. I mean, that's always been the kind of if you've been back from the USSR days, the standard days. If the criticism is brought up, they will always just kind of defer to, well, what about America, right? What about transgender story hour or something? That's the kind of typical thing, where you will point out that Russia essentially has open borders or something, and they'll just post a picture of Rachel Levine. A lot of these interactions that I've had are going like that. Let's see something else here.
And again, I'm seeing some chatter going by on the right side here. Just because the West has the transgender story hour doesn't mean that the other narrative is true, right? Or is good. That's all we're saying.
Yeah, I'm not saying transgender story hour is good. I'm just saying that the strategy for these types is, if you bring up a shortcoming of Russia or something, a problem inside of Russia, they go to what about transgender story hour, because they're not actually interested in addressing any problems in Russia at all. That's kind of the hallmark of a lot of these types, is that they will never punch east.
And in that sense, not very interested in addressing any of the problems in the West either, right? It's just sort of whinging in a sense.
Yeah, no, they're not. I mean, the addressing of those problems means that Russia is going to win and be the world leader. Essentially, it's just legitimizing Russian foreign policy. Yeah. That's their point. Is that because the West has transgender story hour, then Russia deserves to win. That's kind of their argument. Instead of okay, but what about these problems inside of Russia? Well, they'll never discuss it, and that's kind of also one of the last hallmarks, is that they're really good kind of Russian propagandists, is that they will never ever concede to anything, a problem inside of Russia. It's either defection to something wrong about the US, or they will just kind of hand wave the problem away. So I think for a person who could have like Russian sympathies, at least if you're intellectually honest, you'd be willing to at least talk about, okay, maybe there's problems in Russia as well. Maybe Russia isn't perfect, but you're not going to hear that. Typically, it'll just be, no, they just move on to something else. Last one. There's certain key words, there's certain key phrases that's being used in Russian rhetoric all the time. Russian speaking is a term that I want you just to note there. If somebody's using the term Russian speaking, they are like 99% sure that they're a Russian propagandist. Okay, why? Because it goes back to the Russian multiculturalism narrative. Like, Russian speaking is basically Russian political correctness. Okay, that's what, when they annexed Crimea from Ukraine, they did that under the guise of, we're going to protect the Russian-speaking minorities inside of Crimea. Well, what is that? Can't you just say Russians? We're going to protect Russians or ethnic Russians? No, because that wouldn't be politically correct. This is like Latinx or something. These terms, because you don't want to be exclusionary. And we'll see later that the Russian elite goes to very far lengths to try to maintain good relations between the different ethnic groups inside of Russia. So, but it would be almost like, let's say, like Mexico annexed a part of Texas or something, and they said that we're going to protect the we need to protect the interest of Spanish-speaking peoples inside of Texas or something. It's like that level of bizarre, but that's kind of like their version of the political correctness. And the last one is sort of Anglo-Saxon, like the actual unironic use of Anglo-Saxon as a sort of general bogeyman that they point out. Like Putin talked about Anglo-Saxon destroying the Nord Stream pipeline or something. This is something that it's just weird if you're living in the West and you're speaking from a Western context to sort of talk about the subversive Anglo-Saxon. It's almost like a joke, but in Russia, this is like the main problem. It's not the Jew, as some people want to say. It is actually just Anglos that they think is behind everything, and the reason why they haven't succeeded, or they're they have the problems that they have. So, yeah. Now I went through that. Maybe you could bring up the concentric media model, so I could just explain it a little bit. more. Yeah,
We're coming up
already
on
at
an
1
hour
hour,
here.
so
Just
maybe we have to
yeah.
do a two-parter on this because there's just so much content. But we'll
You
try
just
to
did
do
the
our best.
disclaimer. Yeah. Okay. I think this is very good to explain when we're sort of criticizing some people here. We're alluding to what some people have done or some people haven't done, and etc. When you bring up this sort of this list of things that people do, I see some names of other, friends, as it were, flying by in the chat on the right. I'm not sure if this needs to be explained, but obviously, I would think that we tend to live here in the alternative / dissident Wild West area, which means that whether or not you're actually sort of propagating the propaganda, you're going to brush up against these narratives, right? That's what we're saying.
So here's my little crude model of what I would consider media spheres inside of the West, and that's important context there. That's what's going on inside of the West. It is 3 concentric circles, with the first one being what I consider mainstream legacy media, the second circle being approved opposition, and the third one is sort of alternative dissident media. Right. I mean, what is in like the first circle? The first circle is legacy things like, say, like the New York Times, for example, National Public Radio in the United States, The Economist, like these sort of. When Moldbug is talking about the cathedral and sort of this sort of media-run state, this is what he means. He means like these sort of things that if you work as a bureaucrat or something inside of a public organization and you genuinely you have buy-in to the system, like you sort of believe in the system that you're living in and you want to uphold it and perpetuate it, you're going to trust these sources, and they perpetuate these kind of like technocratic globalist narratives. This is like the EU narratives, the UN narratives, the kind of global world order style narratives. This sphere is liberal narratives in a sense. The sphere has a lot of Jews in it. There's a lot of white people in it as well, but the narratives themselves are at the core sort of about maintaining the Western regime and the rules-based world order. That's in a sense, so if you move into the second concentric circle, you get to the approved opposition, or sort of the kosher conservative opposition bit. I mean, it's very easy to think of these in terms of right and left, but I really don't want to. They do intersect in weird ways, but it's not really about this circle is right and this circle is left and so on. It's really more just trying to map out what kind of networks and spaces that exist and what narratives are perpetuated in them. So in Circle 2, that's where you have like your Fox News and the Daily Wires, Breitbart's, Drudge Report, where it's really sort of the drop in quality is actually quite significant, even though people have a much greater skepticism of narrative mainstream media now than they used to. In my opinion, like the quality that you're getting from the New York Times or the Economist is still just miles ahead of what you're getting in like the Daily Wire or Breitbart or some of these other narratives. In the kosher circle. In a sense, like the Daily Wire stuff, they recently released this. What is it, Mr. Bertram or something? These sort of Family Guy ripoffs.
Right. Yeah,
it's a very
that's true.
good indication of the type of stuff that you're getting in this circle. It's like
that was rough.
You're getting approved.
Yeah,
you're getting approved opposition that is lower quality than the stuff you're getting in the media, and it does intersect a little bit with circle number 1. And pretty much everything in there serves to just perpetuate some kind of Zionist narrative, right?
I mean, maybe I'm a Russian bot, but that trailer was one of those you think you hate conservatives, but you don't hate them enough moments.
Yeah, but of course, this is a sphere that has sort of been hurting a lot, and that's what I'm seeing. That this is how this model maps onto the stuff that's going on now with Israel losing credibility. It means that this sphere is hemorrhaging. Right, so the sphere number 2 are losing people to sphere number 3 and sphere number 1. With, I mean, if you look at, say, in Europe, for example, sphere number 2 is almost non-existent in a lot of countries. I mean, you have these sort of Zionist media types in Norway, for example, but they
have
are
some
just
really weird, super pro-Zionist nationalist parties, etc. Which,
But newspapers as well, but they are a lot more marginal. In the United States, this is like this has been half the media, essentially. It's
Yeah.
a sort of partnership between the Zionist and the globalist stuff, whereas like the Zionists are just really hurting at this point. And the third sphere is sort of the alternative sphere that is where we're existing now, and this is a sort of Wild West type landscape where it's sort of like the coal mines. You get some gems on occasion, but most of it is just total shit. There's no quality control. It's just like anybody shows up to say anything. Anybody can
Yeah.
spread disinformation. Some of it's for fun, some of it's for profit,
Yeah.
some of it's good, most of it's actually quite atrocious. But it's a very growing sphere, and I feel like the Russians have the greatest buy-in in terms of narrative in this sphere. So just to give you a few examples of how these movements can work, like say like Tucker, when he worked for Fox, was in sphere number 2.
Hmm.
But okay, why do you move from sphere 2 to sphere 3? Well, you want more freedom is one thing. Different narratives would be another thing, that you sort of feel
Well,
like
he
you're too
literally got
constrained.
booted, didn't
Yeah.
he?
I mean, a lot of these people got booted either because of the quality is too low, so they get knocked down a sphere, right? Or because they're not hitting the right narrative for that sphere. So say like Candace Owens, for example, working for the Daily Wire, is in sphere 2. But when
Mhm.
she started running more of these kind of Russian narratives, like one of what I believe is a Russian narrative is like the Macron's wife is a tranny narrative, and this is something that the analysis that you're seeing from a lot of these sort of anti-Zionist American types is that they were setting her up with shit information to boot her out, right? So this is actually a Zionist ploy to get rid of Candace. But I mean, I genuinely think she was starting to basically buy more into a lot of these Russian stories that are coming out, and wanted to cover more of that aspect and do more of this kind of anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish stuff. So then she's moved into Circle 3, where now she's talking about how Zelensky is a Bolshevik, and a lot of these other narratives. You can just see her go off on Twitter about a lot of this stuff, where it's, I mean, depending on where you are, it's kind of just cringe, or you think it's super based.
So,
wanna,
real quick here, we have a couple of super chats, but I also want to highlight this comment from Caravaggio, who says, "What this is really illustrating is that the Russian narrative is much closer to the truth than the GAE narrative."
Nope.
That's not necessarily true, just because it's just floating around in the same sort of truthy soup that we're in. It doesn't mean that everything is true, right?
No, I don't believe it at
Um,
all. I mean, most of the Russian narratives that are floating around are just cheap disinfo, to be completely honest, and that's the truth for most of the stuff that's going on. I mean, a lot of the Russian stuff is shit that you can just click on. You can just do one Google search and just see that this is fake. That's most of the Russian things that are going on. And I honestly don't. I think the Russian narratives in general are very low quality. That's my point. Is that it's not one Russian narrative. It's 1,000 Russian narratives. It's like a swarm of flies almost, where it's like in the mainstream, it's bigger narratives. It's like Hollywood movies, for example, that is like one large narrative about, say, like the COVID narrative or something. It's one large narrative that is sort of they have the scientists standing there supporting it. They have the organizations, the politicians. Everybody's going to stand and support it. And if you're going to break down the mainstream narrative, you have to do a lot of work and due diligence to try to find cracks in the narrative. But when it comes to like what's going on in Circle 3, it's like Alex Jones is retweeting, Zelensky is conscripting people with Down syndrome, for example. That's what I consider like an alternative 3 narrative. That's sort of like, there's no articles, there's no journalism, there's no thinking at all. It's just kind of like, okay, this sounded like something that was plausible, and I'm just going to retweet this to 1 million people, and we're going to keep spreading it out. That's most of the stuff that's going on in Circle number 3.
and
It's this
that's the strength as well of the alternative / the Circle 3, right? That is the strength, the ability to flank everything from everything, right? But as the saying goes, what is it from the Exorcist, right? Yeah, he will mix truth with lies to try to confuse us. Is that we're the ones who have to sort of sort through the coal, as you said, and find what's actually not necessarily true. I think true or truth is the wrong word to use, really, because the way the online world works is so, what's the word, post-truth, right? It's, you just pick your own narrative, right? That's it.
Well,
So it's even
kind of
harder
the
for us
point.
to figure out, okay, what actually works. That's more the way to think about it. Like what here is coherent, right?
I'm trying to just make a map of how I think these narratives intersect with each other and how they work in the West, right? To just try to explain the model. I'd say, think about the Young Turks, for example, who existed kind of in the mainstream narrative bubble. And you had so many of the Young Turks people breaking out into various spheres, like say like Dave Rubin, right? Who okay, I'm no longer kind of a mainstream liberal journalist, so I'm going to be like a libertarian guy, right? And I'm going to be in
Yeah.
circle number 2 and just run kosher stuff all the time. And like I would basically say like the quality is lower. The quality of the stuff that Rubin is doing now is sort of lower than what he was doing on TYT, even though that's a low bar to set. But it's worse. And say someone like
Sure.
Jimmy
But I mean,
Dore, as well, who sort of goes from circle 1 to circle 3, where it's sort of he's kind of straight into more of the promoting Russia stuff, or more of these kind of anti-imperialist narratives, the way that the left is doing them. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, by the way.
No, I forgot where I was going. I'm gonna bring up a couple of posts here. Glow in the Dark has been graciously giving us some money throughout the stream, and we've been going as fast as we can trying to get through this today. So I'm just gonna bring up some of his stuff that he said earlier. For $2, he said Afghanistan would disagree with a non-violent GAE. I think that was in relation to his first post about Russia and
It's
the GAE.
probably
fighting
something
over
that I
Ukraine.
said, but I think I may have just misspoke or misarticulated
Okay.
myself in the way that the Russian style of kind of expansion is annexation, just like old school annexation of
Sure.
land, whereas the American style is sort of okay. Sometimes they'll use
It's the weird
money
NGO thing, yeah.
or using say NGOs or some soft power angles, but of course they have hard power in spades. But the way that they're controlling the sphere is not through annexation. It's not because like the United States is annexing country and making it a part of the United States. So it's like the United States is growing out, or like the Britain or something where you have an overseas empire and they're making colonies, right, and annexing land for the British Empire. That's not how they're doing it. It's much more sort of covert control through finance, for example. That's what I meant. So yeah, I don't disagree on bombing in the Middle East.
For $5, he says, if you want the truth, the West built up Russia and China. We could nip this issue in the butt, I guess the bud. It's just the elite have invested heavily overseas. And that's true. That's a part of the sort of the practical geopolitics, I suppose, of it, right? And you see that every time in the U.S. politics, just sort of in the kind of day-to-day politics, whenever one of the presidents want to try to let's say they want to cool down their trading partnership with China, right? A lot of people get upset because there's a lot of money invested in it.
A lot of money invested in this. Okay.
Yes. $5 again. Thank you so much. Unfortunately for the West, the foreigners are reaching self-sufficiency. If this ever happens, the West is effed if they don't start building up the West. I mean, that's kind of partially why there are people in the EU who are sort of starting to drum the French drum of EU army, EU self-sufficiency.
Which I think is absolutely necessary, because the EU has just been slacking off like for the last 50 years. They've just been really, I mean, this is something, another stream that we have to be doing. But as much as I do to try to pro-European takes, like Europe has really dropped the ball here, damn, like they really dropped the ball. You have to do something else than like welfare and regulation at some point and figure out how to actually create self-sufficiency in the future and some kind of competitiveness, so we don't have this constant brain drain from the EU to the US. It's not a good dynamic. But again, I don't want to get too off topic. But yeah, I think I don't know if we need to dwell anymore on these circles. It was just to try to illustrate the point is that I believe that the stuff that is going on now is that there's a sort of hemorrhaging of people, especially from the circle number 2, that is sort of the kosher, up into the alternative space. But the problem is that inside of the alternative space, it's just a completely dominated space by Russian intelligence and Russian narratives. And when I say like Russian, there's not the Russian narrative. There's like 10,000 Russian narratives that different people believe in. And my point is that like people sort of think that they've reached a lot of these things independently, but I think a lot of them are just sort of made in Russian fucking bot farms to further some level of Russian foreign policy interest, right? But enough about this one. I think I mean, goddamn it, we don't even have that much time left. Like, I really wanted to. Okay,
We could do a part
maybe
2.
people 9 if we're doing like maybe 2 hours.
I'm down.
Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna have to do. I'm just gonna start with one of the narratives that is a little bit more up in our alley. Just to give an example.
Staying
of
long,
narrative,
people.
right? We're
Get a
staying long
drink.
for this one.
Yeah.
So we're going back now, finally, to the Jay Burden episode with T777, right? Just a disclaimer: we've had Thomas on the show. I like Thomas. We had a great time with Thomas. I have no ill will towards Thomas 777, but like the view that he espoused on that show was what I consider, when I talk about third worldism, this is like the quintessential pure third worldist perspective, right? And again, nothing against him personally. I just believe that, like, I'm just going to try to explain the way I understood that view and why I think it's incoherent, and why I think it is in part a sort of Russian narrative that is being pushed on certain parts of the dissident right. So his view is sort of like this, you could think of it as like this sort of Yockey, Francis Parker Yockey style idea, this sort of Cold War alliance, right? So he sees Zionists as the biggest problem in the West. And if we in the West want to defeat the Zionists, we need to ally ourselves with Muslims and Russians. That is the idea. Then if you're against that, you're kind of missing you're sort of missing the point. You're not seeing that like Muslims are actually our natural allies, and like the only reasons that Muslims ever attacked the West is because they're angry about U.S. imperialism, and that we're actually very compatible. Like, okay, many ideas here. Like, Muslims don't actually want to leave their countries, emigrate. That was one. Like, they're actually quite friendly. It was only after 9/11 that these problems started. That's another one. And I want to do an entire stream just on the MQ, like the Muslim question. We just don't have time for it. But the other claim then is like we need to ally with Russia because Russia is at war with Israel, in a sense. Like, that is just the natural thing to do because they are hostile, Russia and Israel. So this is like the first thing that I believe is sort of this is a Russian narrative, in a sense, that's being pushed out. It's not inside of Russia, outside of Russia, to Western dissidents. And people who sort of have this view, say like T77 I mentioned, Nicholas Fuentes has this view, Lucas Gage, Litoria or Stryker or whatever. I think those are a few people who hold that view. At least that's my perception of it. So they hold that perception that Russia is essentially white, like it's sort of Slavic white, ethnocentric, and just anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish. Which, in my view, is just a complete Russian op to try to present to make them friendly to Russia, and I'll explain partly why. I mean, there's a few points for and against. Okay, we look at the question: is Russia at war with Israel? You could look at, say, the Ukraine invasion by Russia. I mean, Israel was I think the last country to condemn that invasion. They wanted to hold on to neutrality for as long as possible. Israel has not sanctioned Russia one bit. Like, all of the EU countries have just done full sanctions, cut off all kind of trade, academic sanctions. Not a single thing in Israel. They are completely allowing trade. In fact, they're enjoying more trade with Russia because some of the things has to go through other routes. So they're actually benefiting from this. They're even, being kind of a safe haven for a lot of the Russian oligarch money, like, because a lot of these Russian oligarchs are Jews. Surprise, surprise. Yeah, cue the shocker music. But Putin's inner circle is actually completely dominated by Russian Jews. And I think Victoria Nuland basically said that, Israel has become a safe haven for Russian dirty money. And she wants to sort of pressure Israel to boycott Russia so that you could have another angle to kind of squeeze them. Right. But the Israelis have refused to do so. They've even worked as mediators between Ukraine and Russia. In terms of Ukraine, Israel has not contributed anything aside from basic humanitarian stuff. They've They've funded a hospital, they've sent medical supplies and doctors, and they've also made it easier for Jews to sort of escape Ukraine to go live in Israel. So my idea is that if the Russians and the Israelis are in some kind of conflict currently and they want each other destroyed, it would be very easy for Israel to just kind of use Ukraine in ways that they aren't using. They have some of the most advanced weapon systems in the world. They have some of the most best trained people. They could have just contributed to Ukraine and just done much more harm. But instead, they've just been kind of the most neutral kind of mediating forces in this. And they've done very little in spite of like the rest of both America and Europe basically going first and saying that we're sanctioning, we're taking the initiative with aggression. They could just throw themselves on that. But they refuse to do so, and they remain neutral to this day and have decent relations with Russia. So that's the reason that I think that generally, from their perspective, it's a sort of incoherent idea. I mean, from the Russian perspective, if you remember the list of like hostile countries, Israel has never been on that list. A significant, amount of, let's say, Putin's inner circle are Jews, as I mentioned. Anything from the Russian prime minister currently, Mikhail Mishustin is Jewish. Like Roman Abramovich is the second richest man in Israel, is Jewish. The guy, he owns Chelsea FC and stuff. I mean, you can just look at, search for like Russian oligarchs.
And
you get
on Twitter,
the list.
you always see those lists of like images of people in top government in the US, and like they all have this, like someone has like photoshopped in the Star of David on them. Yeah. It would be nice to see one for Russia as well.
You could very easily do that with Russia, whether it's the people on top of the industry in Russia, or the media figures in Russia, or the politicians, or the people who are Putin's advisors. It's a lot of Jews, and he is not hostile to them. And Russia in general, it is a multiculturalist project, and they've taken very good care in trying to not offend Jews and making sure that they're safe. I mean, when we talked about in the Russian demographics episode, with the Crocus attack, where about 140 ethnic Russians were killed, the Russian intelligence reported that they had intercepted an attack on a Russian synagogue, right? So they're actually prioritizing defending Jews against terror attacks inside of Russia, as opposed to the ethnic Russians, where it takes like 1 hour before they show up to do fire extinguishing. Essentially, I mean, Putin had Israel's ambassador at his inauguration after his election, and Israel have very explicit laws against revisionism and Holocaust denial. So, I mean, this is one of the points that Stryker made on Twitter, is that if a country really wants to signal their opposition to, for example, Israel, they should make Holocaust revisionism legal, because that's the strongest statement you can make, as Israel is sort of funded on the Holocaust narrative.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm just going to post you a link here that we could look at for a law that was put into place in Russia in 2014.
Peregrinus of Flandria for €2 says so Islamo-Judaism isn't based. And then
it's a big sad face. Yeah. But yeah, if you bring up this Wikipedia article, I can just show you.
I lost it. Oh, here it is. The law against rehabilitation.
Yeah. Yep.
Let me just bring it up here. There we go.
But I mean, if you want to talk about boomer truth, right, and sort of anti-Nazi attitudes, this is what it's coming back to, the kind of very explicit Russian anti-Nazi and anti-fascist attitudes, that this has been coded into law. And it doesn't just include Holocaust revisionism, but general any revisionism on the Russian view of the World War II narrative, period. It's very serious, right? And this basically means, if you follow this law strictly, it is everyone on that list, from Thomas 777 to Pete Quinones, to Academic Agent, to Lucas Gage, to Nick Fuentes, and everybody who's engaging in the type of journalism and revisionism that those people are engaging in would be in jail in Russia. It's very simple. They would not be allowed under any circumstance to do what they're doing. So it does sort of put
at least
a giant
government
bullet.
would have ample sort of reason to put them in jail if they wanted, right?
Yes, exactly. So they would be rotting in jail along with the other Russian ethno-nationalists, which is something that's not popular in Russia. People like Alexander Navalny are people who actually are ethno-nats or Russian separatists in there. which they tend to just put in jail because it's not something they want. It's not a part of their multicultural project. So, I mean, if there is a covert war between Israel and Russia, then it's so covert that you can't see it under a microscope. I mean, maybe I'm totally wrong, and people have some kind of based esoteric knowledge as to why they're doing secret space laser wars somewhere else, right? But I think at least these points, it does hit pretty hard against the narrative that Russia is like this based ethno-nationalist state that is fighting Israel, and therefore we should ally with Russians. Right? You see what I mean? And this is what I mean by Russian narratives and people pushing Russian narratives, whether they understand it or not, because T777 is then sitting there, and he's a very educated, very smart guy. So it lends a lot of credibility to this type of a narrative, which the only thing, in my opinion, it's incoherent, and it has nothing to do with the realities of Russia, but it pushes the idea to our spheres that basically we should ally with Russia. Russia is our friend. And if you are an anti-Zionist, if you're a true anti-Zionist ally, then you should be a Russian ally as well. Even though, again, it's I just think
Russia would be just as much an ally.
Yeah, they would they take care of you. They have that Russia, number one, has an interest in destroying Israel, which I don't think they have, and that Russia would be an ally to the people in our spheres that are doing historical and Holocaust revisionism, which is absolutely false. I mean, this is like, I talked about, you have the meme with the Hasidic Jew that's like the Chad, and he says, I hate you with every fiber of my being. And on the other end, it's the drooling MAGA boomer with the cap, Bojack, right? He says, you're my greatest ally, right? I mean, in this case, it's like Vladimir Putin saying, I hate you with every fiber of my being. And then you have Lucas Gage on the other side saying, you're my greatest ally, right? That's kind of what my view on the third positionist, Holocaust revisionist people who promote Russia as an ethno-state, that is in a sense a Russian narrative. This is the first one that I basically, just so people understand what I'm trying to say here, is that these things are being promoted to some degree unknowingly and to some degree deliberately in our spaces to make people want to ally with Russia, even though it's not particularly in their interest. So now we've done one narrative, then we could take a look at really, I mean, people know who Ian Miles Chung is, I suppose.
Unfortunately, yes.
I mean, this is a certain type of content that's being promoted on Twitter. Elon Musk is retweeting him. You're seeing a lot of other people are retweeting him. And what is the type of content he's pushing? Well, I mean, first of all, he lives in, I'm not sure where he's living in Taiwan. He is not Western, right? He lives in some Asian country.
Singapore?
He's try to look it up on Wikipedia or something. But he is basically posting videos of white people getting beaten up by black people. That is sort of his main type of content. And a lot of nationalist accounts are sharing this. It's very popular among people on the right wing to share videos that they think is like, this is radicalizing or something, to share videos. I'm seeing people on the Norwegian right.
In Malaysia.
Yeah, in Malaysia, and on the Swedish right wing, they're sharing this stuff with each other, and they're sharing stuff from his account. Okay, now let's go through the checklist of like how to spot Russia ups there. Can you bring up the Russia Today link for Ian Miles Chung? Because while you're I'm just going to.
It's interesting to go through sort of his articles from the beginning, I think, but because there's a shift at some point, and it seems to coincide, obviously, with the happenings in the world at the time. But okay, yes, here's the overview.
Yep. So you can just keep scrolling here because he has articles and articles and articles for Russia Today, right? Meaning that basically Russian state media thinks that this guy is good enough to promote their message. So this was one of my criteria. The guy, how do you spot these type of Russian op guys if they're being published here? It's quite likely. I mean, if this wasn't enough, you could look at that tweet that he posted. I titled it "Russia is 1950s America," right?
Let's see here.
I'll just keep talking, so we'll save it for time. But he's posted
a tweet with the 1950s America.
It's a tweet, but the tweet links to an article where it's basically he's posting stuff like this on his timeline, where it's trying to sell Americans the idea that if you're a good old boy in the United States, you can move to Russia in Siberia or something and live the 1950s trad lifestyle. I mean, it's just like the degree of psyop you have to be to buy something like this is just absolutely incredible. But it's presented like completely straight faced. This is not something you're posting because you just thought it was interesting. This is advertising, basically. You have this account on Twitter called "Move to Russia" or something. It is that type of content where you just you're an American boomer, just take your money and go marry Natasha or something. You can have a family here. Because it's not only making the claims that you can live in 1950s America and Siberia, but also that if you're a 60-year-old, you can start a family in Russia, and that's easy because you have all of these trad models that are living there. I mean, normally if we had if you had more time, we should just go and read through it. But at least now I've shown the article. Maybe you could bring up his next tweet there, this sort of like Russia has no diversity one. Because this is
I can bring it up, but the post he's linking is it no longer exists.
Oh yeah, okay. What do you notice here? So that's the
Most
problem
likely
with
just like walking around St. Petersburg or something, and it's just
this is like the Tucker Carlson strategy, right? He basically has a video. Okay, the content he's posting is mostly stuff that's happening in the West. Is black people that are beating up white people or dominating white people or peeing on white people or something, humiliating them. And occasionally he posts a video of Russia that's like, what do you notice here? Then it's only white people because it's going in the nicest district of St. Petersburg or something. And so basically pushing the narrative that the West is unsafe. And you're being constantly, if you go outside in the West, you're going to get choked unconscious by some black guy and just slapped around and have that filmed. And if you go to Russia, it's just going to be all white people who live there, and you should absolutely go to Russia. He was even running the sort of the Russian, the sort of kind of narrative after the Crocus attack that they're deporting Muslims, right? That was the Russian narrative that was going on. That even people in our spheres were sharing it. They say, "Oh, look how based this! They're deporting people from Tajikistan," which is interesting because this is like what I consider like the basic, one of these kind of basic narratives that are being marketed to Western right-wingers who are not esoteric, and they're not kind of schizo enough to know that this is wrong. But, the basic narrative around the Crocus attack was that, immigrants were in, Russia is actually a white ethno-state, but a few immigrants came in anyway. And so Putin deported them because he's based and nationalist, right? But the other narrative that was pushed out of Russia was that, in fact, this was not an immigrant thing. This was actually a CIA op or a Ukrainian op, right? So it had nothing to do with the failure of the Russian multicultural system. Actually, it's the CIA who is making these people do this, right? And that's the sort of what I'm talking about, the kind of myriad of contradicting narratives that they're running. They have people running the narrative that Russia is actually a safe Western ethno-state, and there's no brown people there. And if you figure out, oh, that's actually not true, there are brown people there, well, then it's, okay, Russia is multicultural, but that's a good thing because Russian multiculturalism is based, you see, because like Putin knows how to do multiculturalism. He is very savvy politically, and Muslims and Jews and Christians are living in peace in Russia because of the way Putin is handling things. Like his authoritarian style is sort of what is needed for this to work, and therefore it's based. You could look up if you look up Nick Griffin's tweets, he has like explicit tweets about this, promoting this to Western nationalists, that Russian multiculturalism is very cool.
Let's see here.
See if you can see it in
Nick Griffin. Yep, here it is.
Multiculturalism is based. Yeah, it's the lowest one.
The portrait, or is it the?
No, it's not the portrait. The
okay,
the other one.
Yep. Here we go. Let's bring that up. The patriarch. Here it says, Patriarch Kirill explains the realities of the multi-ethnic nature of superpower Russia and how Russia expects such guests to behave. Well, take note. There's a hint here that the dirty game being played by CIA/ISIS with Muslim terror attacks is from the same playbook as the CIA/Zionists/mid-century Germans in Ukraine. The aim is to exploit the old divisions to split the country up, just like they did in Yugoslavia, Lebanon, Syria, and Northern Ireland. The US deep state is a blood-stained horror. Quote, no one scare us with Russian nationalism. Russian nationalism does not exist in nature. Everyone knows this. There are fraternal peoples around us with whom we have always strived to build good neighborly relations, understanding the difficult economic situation that has developed in a number of countries of the former Soviet Union. At the same time, we have the right to demand respect for our foundations and culture on the part of those who come to Russia from these countries, end quote.
Yeah,
And
so
some notes from the translator, yeah.
and yeah, basically what he said here is that okay, you started out from the prior that you're angry at multiculturalism in the West and you don't think immigration is good. Well, actually, multiculturalism and immigration is good, but only it's good when Russia does it, right? That's the narrative here. And any time that there are problems here, if you point to, well, what about this terror attack? What about like the Chechen wars, for example, like Muslim separatists or Salafists attacks or something? Then it's the CIA. And I mean, I'm not kidding. This is not just Nick Griffin. There's so many people that I've had discussions with, and this is what they bring up. So they're on the like slightly higher level of the Russian brainwashing hierarchy, where they sort of think that actually Russia is Russian multiculturalism actually works, unlike in the West, where it's like a utopian fantasy. Where in Russia, it's like the reality of the multicultural paradise. And it's only foreign ops that are making it difficult for Russia. If we could only get rid of the CIA, then you would have like this kind of space race, non-gay space communism. That would be the thing. But it's, I mean, but again, back to that was just to point out the contradiction here, because you're going to see so many of these type of contradicting narratives where it's like, okay, you believed in one narrative, but then it's like, okay, maybe that's not true, so you go on to another narrative, and then okay, if that's not true, then there's like a third narrative waiting for you in there, and it's all sort of contradictory, pointing in every direction. But it's just, again, it's just like throwing spaghetti on the wall or something. It's going to stick eventually. You're going to find something that fits into your worldview and that you can sort of believe in, and then continue to supporting Russian foreign policy. So as a summary on the Einmaßung and the basic narratives, you have Russia is an ethno-state, and the West is just a kind of a multicultural hellhole. People are just slapping each other every time you go outside. You get beaten up by a black guy, and the people who are pushing this are the Einmaßung is one account. The Radio Genoa is another one, who is also doing kind of like pro-Russia stuff. European Invasion is another account. Anti-White Watch. Those are the ones, at least, that I looked at, where if you look for, I try to just use the Twitter advanced search to try to look for Russia, Putin, and that kind of stuff. And it's like in between this sort of like white humiliation porn that they're posting, that's also pro-Russia stuff. And it's just every fucking time this happens, where I see these accounts, and I've gotten very good at spotting them now, that they're posting this kind of rage bait engagement content that nationalists are sharing around, and occasionally they just drop in some pro-Russian stuff in there every time. And this is why I've just started.
I'd like to point out that you have a spreadsheet here with like hundreds of tweets. The research is deep on this one. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I mean, it's Twitter is broken, right? The advanced search feature doesn't work very well.
Sure.
And a lot of stuff just gets buried. So if I have to track narratives, then I have to keep spreadsheets or something, because they just get lost, and people delete their tweets and remove their photos and stuff. So archiving is actually quite important. The internet does not last forever anymore. Let's see.
True.
Something else that I've sort of noticed that is subversive. You could look at the bot accounts, maybe bring up some of these. See, the one that's called Njorder.
Njorder. Where is this? Yeah, okay. Njorder 6. Do you want the actual account?
No, well, you could put the two last tweets you could post up. It's one about what is it, Aaron Bushnell, and one about Victoria Nuland.
Sure. Here we go. He says,
actually, just do the Victoria Nuland one first, because I needed to just outline a couple of points on this.
We'll do that first.
So this is a sort of an this is in Norwegian, by the way, so I'm just going to translate what is being said here. It says, white Western women of violence are the most inhumane and foul beasts in the world. they are compliant in the mass murder of millions of innocent people the world over, and it's basically Margaret Thatcher, Victoria Nuland, Albrecht, and I'm not sure if it's Haley or something.
I think that's Haley, isn't
The last one, yeah. So this account, if you look at the logo that he has, right, it's some sort of like Nordic rune symbol that is typically coded as white nationalist, right? And the account, it just sort of says like Norway first or something, and of course anti-fascist. It says there, so it's like Norwegian nationalist, anti-fascist. This has about 3,000 subscribers, and it's being retweeted by a lot of Norwegian accounts who are talking about Palestine and who are talking about Russia, right? And all of the posts here are like, it starts, you see there's a squiggle, right, before the post, and it ends with a squiggle. And there's always this like 2 blocks of text, squiggle, squiggle. I mean, this stuff just doesn't pass the Turing test, both because it's inconsistent with language. Sometimes it posts in English, and sometimes it's in Norwegian. Sometimes it's replying to people in a Norwegian thread with English, and sometimes it's replying with Norwegian to English threads. So this does not appear to be a human being at all, but it's very popular, and it's sort of pushing both this kind of like mainly the Palestine stuff, and it's always sort of like things that are formatted. You can't have I've asked questions to this account. You can't have a coherent conversation. But this is an example of what a bot looks like, and the kind of content that they're pushing through bots and trying to sell into the right wing. Let's see. So, I mean, the Palestine stuff is interesting.
Is this the guy, when you started like replying to him, he always replied to you in English? Is this the same guy?
That was another guy, but there's there's other accounts as well that are like this, where I've tried to reply to. They're replying to me with a video or something. I posted something about Epstein, and they started just replying with pictures. Right?
And you're
the account, yeah.
You're usually posting at them in Norwegian as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I posted at him in Norwegian, and he kept just like responding in English. And I just asked, like, don't you know Norwegian? Can't you just respond? And it just kept replying in English with more photos, and the stuff just wasn't. The stuff just, yeah, this is true, Brent. I've been digging pretty deep in these rabbit holes now, but these types of account where it's like they don't pass the Turing test. Basically, you can't convince me that's like a regular human being who understands Norwegian behind these accounts, but they're being shared around, and they're pushing the same narratives. I mean, as far as the Palestine stuff goes, this is sort of the main narrative that is very consistent among the Russian influencers, right? Aside from if you're on basic tier, Ian Miles Chung tier, sharing the blacks being beaten by whites, he's sort of a Israel supporter. But if you go above that, if you go into like these accounts or Nick Griffin or like the Judge Napolitano or any of these expert types, it's always anti-Palestine, anti-Israel, all the way down. Something that I believe is actually very beneficial for Russia, for the same reason that Russia was supporting Black Lives Matter.
That does make us, I'm just, again, for people joining us, that makes us sound like we are being pro-Israel here. Now, of course, anyone listening from YouTube, we here at the Longhouse do love the nation of Israel, but keep in mind, just because one narrative isn't true doesn't mean the other narrative is.
Yeah, I also support Palestine, by the way, but that's kind of not the point. I think that the way
not
that
for the reasons that these people do.
but you can bring up the other tweet with Aaron Bushnell, because I wanted to make that Palestine point here. That I think that Russia is doing the Palestine signaling to the West for the same reasons.
Which tweet did you want?
No, it's from the same account. The first one.
The other tweet from the same account. Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
That it's the same reason that they supported Black Lives Matter in 2020. Right, this was sort of revealed that there were many Facebook accounts that were organizing Black Lives Matter protests that were run by Russians. Right, so they see this as a way to spread more discord inside of the West, right, and just make it more chaotic, and just ruin trust, make the West less cohesive in general, and it's working to a very large extent. I don't know if we covered that article with the Norwegian guy, the Norwegian Palestine guy, who went into like military manufacturing facilities and destroyed assembly lines.
That's true. We didn't cover that.
With a plier, but this happened actually because he believed basically that these military manufacturing centers were manufacturing equipment for Israel, and this was false information, right?
Yeah.
So who benefits from this? If you make useful leftist idiots go into military facilities and sabotage them because they believe they're sending them to Israel, it's basically it hurts the Ukraine effort. It hurts these countries' ability to provide for their own militaries, which is exactly what Russia wants.
It's a bit of a stretch, though. But yeah, I guess if you're going with the throwing everything at the wall, I guess that could be one of them.
The cheapest kind of like internal sabotage you can get is to try to rile up as many like insane leftists, insane pro-Palestine leftists into thinking that they're saving Palestine by sabotaging Western military infrastructure, which is happening other places as well. I saw some recent articles about it in, I'm not sure if it was in the UK or something, but like these Palestine protesters who keep sabotaging various utilities. Are you getting the tweet up, by the way? I'm not seeing anything.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to share my screen. This is the one, yes?
Yeah, so this is again what Russia promotes, like the Aaron Bushnell, the kind of like low IQ, anti-Semitism, put yourself on fire leftism. This is kind of what the model of what Russia wants you to do, is that to go out and sort of put yourself on fire in front of the embassy, or just the most kind of things that actually don't hurt Israel at all, but it just kind of creates more discord inside of the West. And they've been shockingly successful when I see the amount of like leftists who have gone into this kind of schizo mode of just doing low IQ anti-Semitism stuff. On like I'm following people on the Norwegian timeline, these kind of Palestine people who are now talking about like Epstein constantly, and how Jews should be closed out of Norway because they smell bad and stuff. I'm not even kidding. This is stuff that I've read on the timeline. So it's being boosted by Russia, which is sort of, okay, you can say that, okay, that's cool because that helps the anti-Zionism effort, but realize that Russia is not doing that internally. You're not seeing Palestine protest inside of Russia. They do not want to agitate their own Muslims against their own Jews at any cost. All of that stuff will be cracked down on immediately because they need to have this sort of peaceful, multicultural Russian paradise internally. But they want to basically seed as much kind of group resentment in the West as possible. And whether you think this is good for our cause or not, I mean, it's up to you. But I'm just kind of saying that I believe that a lot of the push for this stuff is coming from that direction. It's I don't believe it's organic. So we could then move on to, yeah, okay, we'll try to cap it off.
I mean, if nothing else, this account is suspect, right? Like the New Order guy.
Yeah, I would bet my house on this. I would bet my house on this just being a part of like a Russian.
He has like 3,000 followers.
Farm, yeah.
His tweets gets like 30 views, right?
But he's being shared in the right places. It's not just you see, it's not about like the total volume, but it's really about the right people getting it. You know, you have smaller accounts that are being followed by specific people. So and that's like, it's not like one account. Like this is all that that the Russians have. They have like a myriad. They probably have thousands of these that are pushing different narratives that in some way is furthering the Russian narrative, right? But so we could move on to, you know, another tier of the Russian propaganda here. If we go on to Alex Jones, you could look at the clip there. He has from Infowars where he has Jackson Hinkle on as a guest.
Infowars, Jackson Hinkle. You're gonna have to help me to find that link. Which one is it?
Yeah, I'll just post it again because there's just way too many.
Is it the We Are Putin one?
No. Okay, now the one at the bottom.
Yeah, here we go. Let's see here.
Yeah, just not have too much of the silence here.
No,
we could watch the. Sorry, did I send you the wrong tweet?
Nope, I just shared the wrong one. Here we go. Here we go.
Yeah, run it.
You want me to just play it?
Out Russian society. So when you look at the people that came before the current generation of politicians, it's not surprising what they're doing.
By the way, you show your knowledge of history, which most people don't have. Putin calls them the Anglos. because that's the name of the group. It doesn't mean white people. It's the Anglo-American Empire. That's Churchill's name for it.
Mm.
And when Putin talks, he calls it directly out, and that's where we are.
Yeah, yeah. And it's 100% where we are. It's the city of London and Wall Street funding all of this madness. And history hasn't changed a whole lot from the end of World War II, you know? We saw the Anglos, we saw the Dulles brothers, George Bush family fund the rise of Hitler, and with the goal of taking out the Russian Empire and wiping out Russian society. So when you look at the people that came before the current generation of politicians, it's not surprising what they're doing.
By the way, you show your
So,
knowledge.
okay, now you can stop it
Yeah.
because we've gone on loop here. Just share Cyber Ninja Zero's comment here, because I think it's very indicative of the point that I was trying to make here. That it's this
one?
kosher Jones, right? and here's the misdiagnosis: is that people are going to hear Alex Jones say stuff like this about Adolf Hitler, that is sort of, oh, that is wrong, right? Because they have good knowledge about the World War II and Germany during World War II. So when Alex Jones says something wrong, it's like, oh, this is Zionist propaganda, right? But Alex Jones has made shows criticizing Zionists. He recently had like this huge special about the Zionist grip on America. The stuff that's going on here is just a pure Russian narrative. The idea that the reason that the Nazis existed was because they're funded by the Anglos to take out Russians, for example. How can you even argue? How can you say that this is like a Zionist narrative?
Yeah, that's
like
not a homegrown Western narrative, right?
No, exactly, and it's not something that sort of benefits the Zionists either. This is what the Russians believe in. Like they see themselves as kind of the victim of the Nazis that are being funded by the Anglos. This is what I was talking about, the Anglo-Saxon boogeyman that Alex Jones was talking about. And I mean, Alex Jones will talk about Zionists, but find me some video where he's criticizing Russia. I was not able to find it. The unprincipled exception for Alex Jones is Russia. And basically, he validates Putin. He will not criticize it that way. He will actually criticize Israel on occasion, but he will never criticize Russia. So for me, he's squarely in that space of just basically running narratives. This is the model, right? Just run 1,000 narratives, and all of them end up just benefiting Russian foreign policy. And I mean, I know that this sounds quacky, but this is what I've come to believe about guys like him.
I don't know if she's Kate here is talking about us. Are they ignoring who started / funded the Russian Revolution? Well, you can look at the sort of the people who I'm going to try to have to tiptoe around this. There's the part about the money and the funding for the Russian Revolution, but you could also make the argument from the Russian perspective that the Germans basically releasing what's his face from house arrest, Lenin from house arrest, and sending him back to Russia to spark the revolution was a play against Russia, right? So
yeah, I'm not
again multiple narratives here, right?
I can't get
they
into like historical stuff deeply here. We just do not have the time. I just need to get through the points.
Sorry.
But okay, yeah, the Infowars guy, yeah, exactly. It's that's the kind of point, is that if you listen to Alex Jones, the narratives that he's running, running currently when it's about the Ukraine, Russia stuff, it is just squarely pro-Russian narratives all the way down, even stuff that is very contradictory to his own, I would say, his own ethos, to his own personality, right? He's been running this kind of he's usually talking about prepper stuff, the solar flares are going to go out and they're going to knock out all the things, and I'm gonna have the Mad Max band, and we're going to eat the globalists, so we're going to bring the guns, so we're going to shoot all of them. And when he comes to talking about Russia, it's like he turns into this kind of pacifist, right? And he starts going to these appeasement narratives where it's sort of, well, the biggest cause of death is driving in a car, so I try to not drive my car too much with my daughter in it, and I try to take my heart medicine to avoid a heart attack. But I'm so scared about World War III. We can't escalate the tensions against Russia, because then there's going to be nuclear war, and we really need cooler heads need to prevail here. It's like, so he turns into this absolute pussy all of a sudden, who's very scared of the apocalypse.
We had to go long to get the Luddick Alex Jones impression. That was great.
who is not suddenly just the tough guy in the apocalypse guy, who's very scared of escalation. And if anybody makes Monkey Man angry, he's going to use the nukes. So we have to appease constantly. That is like this kind of concern trolling Russian narrative, right? This kind of, oh no, Putin's going to be angry. We have to have cooler heads or something. Or if you don't buy that narrative, then it's like, well, okay, yeah, they're just going to bomb us anyway. So you can't do anything about it. But I mean, of course, these are the more sort of historical narratives, but Alex Jones is not above sharing his share of misinformation as well. So, I mean, can you get the Down syndrome tweet in? Is that
the Down syndrome? I don't. There's so many tweets here. Which one is the Down syndrome?
I have to just feed them to you. I knew that the list would be too long and impossible. So.
Oh no! I have it. Yeah, here it is.
Yeah.
All right, the Down syndrome tweet. I'm purposefully not timing out Sergey in the chat because I've never seen him before. And
well, I told you there would be
there's some glowing.
This would happen, right? So this always happens, by the way, especially when we reach a certain massive audience. I think if we had like 10 times the viewers, there would be 10 times the let's just say the Ruski presence.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't mind.
So he says, yesterday I posted another video of this disabled man who has been conscripted into the Ukrainian army to fight their lost NATO-sponsored war with Russia. A lot of pro-Zelensky sickos thought it was funny to watch him be abused. Others think this is fake. The truth is, Ukraine has been forcing children as young as 14 and men as old as 65 into service. We are sleepwalking into WW3, and people need to wake up.
So this is the stuff that he is retweeting, right? The idea that and this has just been mass retweeted. That they have a video of a guy in military outfit who is either speaking Russian or Ukraine. I can't confirm. And they said this is basically proof that Zelensky is mass recruiting people with Down syndrome into the army, and that's the sort of this pearl clutching outrage that is coming out of this. Which, of course, there's no credibility to it at all. If you think about it for more than 2 seconds, it's like, what's the tactical benefit of having a guy with Down syndrome in the army? There's a reason that the army has IQ tests, basically to avoid people who are too dangerous for their own goods to bring in there. There's just no, even if you were shrewd, there's just no reason to do this. But this is
you
the
have
kind
to
of
be
like,
incredibly desperate in terms of just like being to the point where this is literally your last guy, right? To send someone like that into the front lines. I mean, you're just asking for trouble, right?
But you can't do anything. But this is just kind of mass retweeted. If you search like Ukraine Down syndrome or something, there's like tens of thousands of people who are sharing this sincerely. I mean, it's just such obvious bullshit. And if it's not that, then they're going with the child soldiers, right? Well, they'll just post a video of some Ukrainian kids on a school bus and saying that they're conscripting 10-year-olds, which is sort of it's a little bit more plausible because there's actual tactical advantages to having kids. But the age of conscription is 27 in Ukraine. Right, it's been lowered to 25 recently.
Apparently to consumers.
It's recently, and of course, they're like the Russians are running narratives on that as well. That it's sort of this is look how desperate they are because they're lowering it to 25. But it kind of does defeat these sort of videos. They'll just post a video of kids in a bus or some kid being dragged into a car and claim that he's being pulled into the front lines or something. But it's being reposted constantly, and it's being engaged with people in our spheres who are guys with PhDs, guys who are credentialed, who are just sharing this and starting conversations is completely non-critically, as if like this isn't completely ridiculous. But this is what I mean with like the mass proliferation of these narratives. That it's I mean, whether you like it or not, you're just kind of getting it in the feed constantly. Let's see. Can you find the community notes scoreboards?
The community notes scoreboard. Is that a link or is that on the spreadsheet?
I'm sending you a link here.
Okay.
Just
this one. Yeah, no, I don't think you sent me that one before the stream, but that's fine. This is the community notes leaderboard.
Just to kind of underline, as a kind of statistical fact, the idea of the kind of the Russia bot disinfo and how much of it is on Twitter currently or Elon Musk.
Is this the amount of people who? Is this the amount of community notes your posts have gotten?
Yes, it's a total amount
Okay.
of community notes. So if you look at the people who are here, I looked through all of these accounts, like Concerned Citizens, Illuminati Bot. Please don't click on the accounts because it doesn't work very well. You just have to look at the list
Okay.
here. But if you take the exception of like number 3, for example, or number or some of these who are non-English speaking, you got one with Chinese signs as well, right? One of them is a Portuguese account, and one of them is like some kind of Chinese account. But if you take only the English speaking accounts, then 4 out of 5 of these accounts who are on this leaderboard is sort of Russian disinfo accounts. All of them are sort of sharing the same kind of Russian disinfo, and it's like, okay, you can say, this is regime. This is just regime punishment or something, but like the community note system is different. Like this is some kind of democratic thing that Elon Musk implemented specifically to avoid Reuters and these type of regime fact checkers. So it's like a community sourced system, just in terms of fairness. But like Jackson Hinkle, as you say, who's like the main Russia guy, he's on number 4 on this board. And then there's Ian Miles Chung, as we've talked about already. He's on number 7 or something down there. So and yeah, Dr. Anastasia, the kind of like Danish Greek America First, doctor. So Stu Peters, all of these people are just like pro Russia guys who just keep
obviously
keep posting this info.
It being a community thing, it's gonna hit sort of like big accounts more than small accounts. But yeah.
Well,
it's
I mean,
Samir Ninja here asked where does Owen Benjamin stand on this, and he's not on the list, probably just because he might not be big enough. Right?
Jackson Hinkle has about 2 million followers, right? 2.5 million followers ish.
My point
Alex
is you
Jones,
need to get enough followers for people to start, sort of bothering to community note you, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. But you need a certain amount of reach. Ian Miles has like about 1 million, so there are people who have much more. Have more.
Yeah, but his posts,
followers
I think, usually get a lot more than his followers. Like he put his posts, because I looked them up earlier when we were talking about it. He generally gets like 3 million views per post, so his reach is quite good.
Yeah, no doubt, and I think he's being boosted as well. So dead internet theory for sure. Let's see now. Okay, we're reaching up on 2 hours, so I'm thinking we might have to wrap this up. I'm just going to
Doug Ratman, which I think is a guy from Portal. Otherwise, it's a very unfortunate name. Says, how do we fight dead internet agitprop bots? Well, as we said at the start of this is more just about, just be aware of what you're reading online, right? Just think about the stuff that you're being presented with. It's not just circle 1 or 2 stuff. Even in circle 3, there are people with agendas.
Yes. Okay. I think that since we're coming to the end, maybe we could just have some fun and look at some some of these funnier tweets here. What's a funny thing to end on here? Oh yeah. I think. No, it's actually not funny, but we could look at this account of this guy, Gabe here, just to get an illustration, because I just wanted to actually finish off with really the idea of like, just if you have white nationalist sympathies, just how explicitly hostile both the Russian regime and these kind of Russia supporters are to you and your position. Right. So here we have a guy from
says French merc in Ukraine, and I suppose he is probably dead. That a French mercenary in Ukraine has been killed in war, and Gabe says, "I'm sure an African refugee will take good care of his wife."
Yeah, if you go click on Gabe's account, you can see what the type of content that's being posted there. He's like what I consider like a mid-level Russian influencer, right?
He's followed by Luddic Path. You're going,
yeah, of course.
You're going deep on this, yeah.
My timeline sucks right now. It's only Russian propaganda all day. So Here's his pinned post, right? He
I
says,
stand with Russia because I know the truth about the Nazis in Ukraine. Is this guy American? Is that what he's trying to present as?
He's Romanian.
Like this?
Right?
Okay, because this
He's
photo is kind of like American coded, right? This
But
is
yeah,
American
it's
boomer
telling
coded.
to Americans. That's the thing, is that most of the propaganda is targeted at Americans. So he's running like just full Russia stuff all the time, and this is also a little bit on the sort of basic side where it's like, oh, Ukrainian Nazis are bad, and French people
They're
who die in
drafting women
Ukraine.
and-
You know,
Yeah.
it sort of gloat about the wives of French soldiers being groped by African refugees, and that's like this kind of. But that is kind of where they are politically, you know, anti-fascist and. So of course running a lot of this implicit racism as well with some of these
Sure.
some of these posts. So again, they do all angles, and it's the Jewish stuff, of course. Let's see if I can find another one. Russians with Attitude is another kind of interesting podcast, just to underline for the people who haven't seen this tweet.
Is this the white nationalism thing?
Yeah, it's more kind of like anti-white nationalism stuff from these accounts.
White nationalism is when a bunch of social rejects try to present a race of super predators as victims, the only state that they're familiar with. They also want to merge the competing nations into one single entity, which is identical to global narrative of the unified West.
Well,
White people needs to be saved. That's something I would expect to hear from a black crack addict in Detroit, or from the Ukrainian Azov battalion.
Well, you need to share the tweet so people can see.
Oh,
I
sorry.
can't see it.
Yeah, my bad. Is something I would expect to hear from a black crack addict in Detroit, or from the Ukrainian Azov battalion, prisoner of war, aka the core audience of white nationalism. I suppose the Azov battalion is quote unquote white nationalists, but that's probably one of the least sort of core audience. When you say the core audience of white nationalism, I think the Azov battalion is one of the last things I would think of.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, they see them as white nationalists or something. I think for far-right Ukrainians, they see kind of not being Nazi as being anti-Russian, basically. That's kind of their attachment. Of course, they probably have quite strict racial views as well. It does differ a little bit on who the groups are, but that was, Russians with Attitude, who was basically just signaling directly against white nationalism. And you could just be wary of this with these types of accounts, because that is kind of the actual line of the real Russia that exists, not the one that is imagined by a lot of these third positionist accounts, but like the actual Russians, and their view of history is basically that white ethno-nationalism can go to hell. Basically, it doesn't fit into the Eurasianists and the Russian project at all. It is a multicultural expansionist project where people who want to have ethnic separatism, that's just kind of a no-no in a sense. So, let's see what else is. I mean, of course, I wanted to. What we're going to miss out on is then looking at more of these kind of ortho bro narratives, which maybe we can just do it as a bonus on another time. But there's accounts like the Orthodox Canonist and stuff that are just running constant these kind of Orthodox spiritual narratives about what's going on. That is, for me, it's sort of like Longhouse stuff, but I'm seeing a lot of like big, serious DR accounts retweeting it and discussing it as serious. So that's kind of what I mean. But yeah, I think it's nice to end here. Maybe we could do some super chats or questions or something, and then round off before I just get to
Sure.
mentally
I mean, if someone
drained.
has any questions here at the end, you can point them out. Let's see here. Unatco said something that, well, it's not that interesting. It's just kind of, again, going back to the core here is that he says, I have a buddy in Russia and he tells me no one likes the Turkeys like Tajiks or Uzbeks and such, and they are deported en masse and or sent to the front to expire, essentially. Who is lying? I think everyone is lying.
Well,
right?
the truth.
But just because the gay is wrong doesn't mean everything else is right. Yeah.
Well, yeah, the truth is that they're I mean, there is an open border sea for Tajiks, and people don't like them in Russia, but they're brought in to either do construction, to be in the war, or to, basically help with the Russian economy, because there are demographic issues in Russia. Russia have problems with birth rates among the ethnic Russians, as every other modern country. So that's an issue, and Russia also struggles with emigration, that a lot of that Slavic population is moving away. So if you want to do geopolitics the way Putin is doing it, you need a certain amount of people. And the way to do it is, okay, you bring in immigration, right? So Putin has opened the door then for immigrants from India to come in freely, from Central Asia to come in freely, and he's also bringing in people from the African, a lot of these African states where Russia has taken over. Like many people don't know this, but the French have essentially lost many of their African colonies to Russia, where Russian troops have run coups and taken them over, and they're using these. Basically as recruitment pools. So they're bringing in more soldiers to fight in the Ukrainian war from African countries, and also former communist countries like Cuba, for example. And do the ethnic Russians like this? No, that's absolutely true. They don't like it, just like white people in the West don't like it when immigrants are brought in. The point is that this is happening in Russia as well. It's arguably happening even faster in Russia. And people who are selling the narrative, either that Russia does not have a problem with immigration, Russian multiculturalism works perfectly, Russia is an ethno-state, Russia is like a staunch anti-Zionist, anti-Israel power, are essentially bullshitting you into carrying water for Russian foreign policy. And that's kind of the point that I wanted to make here, and I wish I didn't have to make it. But like, these views are,
Okay,
in my
hang on
view,
a
the
moment.
mainstream views.
I'm just gonna have to, Sergey, you've been in this chat this entire time, right? You've been saying things that we agree with, and then saying that we're wrong for saying them, right? Things that you've been posting in chat, Ludwig said either before or after you posted them, and still you say that we're wrong because we agree with you. So what I want you to do, because you're new here, I want you to watch every single episode of the Longhouse, going back all the way, like, how long have we been doing this? 2-3 years? And comment on all of the videos. And when you do that, we'll do an episode with you talking about Russia. Is that a deal? I'm going to need a comment on every single live stream we've ever done.
That's a bit
which
much,
mentions
actually.
in detail what the stream is about. Okay, if you can tell me in a comment under every video what the stream is about, we'll do an episode with you on Russia. No problem. I just want to know that you're new here. I want you to enjoy our stuff, and then we'll talk to you. It's no problem. I'm more than happy to talk with you.
Yeah, I actually have wanted to, if you have some kind of like Russian ethno-nationalist sympathies, bring somebody on who is actually from the inside, because it's very hard to get any good information.
I would be happy to talk with you, Sergey. I just want to make sure that you watched our stuff. That's all.
So,
okay.
I mean, yeah, Per the Green is the founder is asking me about Orban's position. And
yeah, I saw he posted a super chat about that. I just forgot to highlight it. I'm sorry. How do you parse Orban's position? Because he's essentially in the EU being against the Ukraine war, or I guess pro-Russian.
I mean, I think that he is kind of like the dream candidate for what a lot of people, especially on like the far right, is imagining that you can have. Whereas he has just made what you consider strategically, selfish alliances, just the same way that Serbia has to. For him, it's like he wanted to have a foot in the door with Russia, and he wanted to have a foot in the door with the EU, and he wanted to have a foot in the door with Israel, and just take kind of the benefits from each of those. The Israelis have helped Hungary in building the border wall there, and sort of helped them with the technology that they use, and they've had decent relations with them. He's probably had good relations with Russia as well in terms of movements back and forth. But now you're coming to a point where there's like a schism, and you can't be neutral in a sense as he would have wanted to, and just have one foot in each camp and try to just do what's best for his people. As to like his actual intentions, it's very difficult to parse. A lot of people point out the corruption in Hungary, but I mean, from this sort of, if you're only interested in this kind of hard line, we're only going to do what's in the interest of our country position, Orban is like the dream candidate. But you're also seeing then the weaknesses of that position, and why many countries choose to, just by consensus, or either because they're being coerced, to go along with the other countries in the alliance, because you're being put in these spots now. I think that is very difficult for Hungary, where it's they're going to be either pushed out of NATO or be forced to leave NATO essentially, and be in a sort of very vulnerable position because they've tried to play all sides and take EU money and use it for internal projects and not comply with EU demands. Like there's only so long where you can do this stuff and not be considered an international pariah. So I mean, that's one of the reasons that I've sort of reconsidered foreign policy in general, and how feasible it actually is to run a foreign policy that a lot of people in the nationalist right are advocating for. So like
You're just saying, like in practice, right? Just is it possible to pull off?
Well, say like the Norway Democrats, for example, who has like an implicit pro-Russia position, an explicit pro-Israel position, and they also hold like this very anti-globalist position where they're saying that we're going to go take Norway out of the kind of like the semi-EU arrangement. They're going to take Norway out of the UN, and we're not going to be in the International Court of Justice. And like they're basically, and we're going to forbid NGOs, like not in Norway, but we're going to forbid Norwegians from being in NGOs in other countries. And like, from the initial nationalist starting point, that's like, oh wow, totally based. But you're essentially just denying Norway the ability to have a foreign policy at all. They're basically saying that we're going to just kind of isolate ourselves here and not be able to affect things that are happening in other countries, and then just kind of not have a foreign policy, which is sort of it becomes kind of an implicitly pro-Russian position because it's a lot easier for Russia to come in and manipulate a country like that. Yeah. Sorry, I've just talked all over the place, but at least I hope that answered the question.
Peregrine has also posted Ludwig dropping facts and logic, high verbal IQ. Question mark. Yes, there's been a lot of is this high verbal IQ going around Twitter. And speaking of, your zone 2 with the Zionists losing out hard, it's that high verbal IQ isn't really doing much for them right now, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that they're engaged in is much harder to defend as well. So there are many factors in that.
True as well.
We can.
Some have also brought up that there might be sort of the sources behind the high verbal IQ, as it were, might not be entirely reliable.
There are, of course, different interpretations on that, but I think there's enough content in our spheres covering that particular issue, so that we're not going to do that now.
Nope. All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching. We've been going for a long time now. It's almost like one of our old streams. And we could probably go on for a lot longer. You've been diving very deeply on this. What I hope you've taken away from this is that you are, I guess, sort of have gotten a bit of a refresh in your critical eye when you're scrolling on Twitter. Use your noggin, think critically, and think about why something is being presented to you on both sides of the spectrum. Anything you want to say before we leave, Ludwig?
I guess just the usual things. If people want to follow me on Twitter, then my handle is just Ludwig Path. I recommend that people go and read praxarchy.com as usual. We always have cool articles coming out. I don't know if we have anyone scheduled for the next Longhouse.
No, we have a lot of things to catch up on, so maybe we'll do Pride stuff next week.
Yeah, Pride is actually pretty good. We have to track that. There's a lot happening in Norway with Pride Month. A lot of interesting things to cover there. So
yes,
I see a user that's Axolotl or something, think tanks. More deep dive and Twitter shills. Yeah, I have a lot more of that content. So if we run out, I could. There's a lot more we could go.
Maybe
through.
We'll have it. It's easy content, but I feel like it's, I don't know. It's kind of annoying, honestly. But yes, we're going to talk a bit about the gay of the gay, as it were. But it's actually a bit of an interesting topic to talk about, because it's brushing up to like legalese and how far an NGO is capable of going until someone shines a light on it, and we're sort of living through it right now, and in the debate in Norway, like how much we talked about this in one of our earliest streams when we talked about the LGBT movement is how undemocratic, as it were, the actions of the LGBT movement is in Norway, and that's been brought to the fore with this debate. So We'd probably. Sorry, it's been going so long I can barely speak. How did we do this for like 4 hours before?
Well, we were younger 2 years ago or something.
We were younger, yeah. Yeah, thank you everyone for watching. You can follow me on Twitter as well if you want some more shit posts. That's mostly what I do these days on some days on Twitter. Otherwise, I wish you a good weekend and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.